I get confused when I look around at the world and I see everybody's running around and, you know, as Bob Dylan said, he not busy being born is busy dying, and yet nobody's trying to figure out what's the cause of death and what happens when you die. I mean, that to me is the only thing really that's of any importance. The rest is all secondary.
That was the great George Harrison during a surprise visit he made to VH1 in 1997, and that was a day that I will never, ever forget. George came by the studio with Ravi Shankar to promote Ravi's album Chants of India, which George had produced and played on. Now, George Harrison rarely ever appeared on TV, and we weren't really sure how long he'd want to stick around. The deal we had with him was that we were going to turn on the cameras, ask George and Ravi a couple of questions about the album, and if George felt comfortable, he'd stay a while. If he didn't, we were going to get our soundbite, call it a day. Well, we ended up talking with him for well over an hour, and then someone from the crew stuck a guitar in George's hand, and he just started taking requests right there on the studio floor. I don't think I will ever have a moment like that again. I was nervous out of my mind, and I sat there next to George Harrison while he played a spontaneous concert for no more than 20 or 30 VH1 staffers and friends. It was truly a magical afternoon, and it wound up being George Harrison's last public performance. So we're going to bring you some of that music later on, but right now we want to give you a chance to hear some of the remarkable conversation George shared with us that day. And you'll see as he got more comfortable, he talked a lot about the Beatles, the Maharishi, All Things Must Pass, the concert for Bangladesh and Bob Dylan, the Traveling Wilburys, John Lennon, and so much more. People like to call George Harrison the quiet Beatle, but I'll tell you, when he opened up, he was just one of the smartest, most interesting, and funniest people it was ever my honor to meet. A lot of the footage you're going to see here has never been shown before, and some of it's kind of rough. The crew here was literally just running around setting up lights and equipment as George got ready to play, but it's really okay. George was never about slickness or showbiz. He was an international star by the time he was 20 years old, and he spent most of his life pushing against all the artifice of fame and celebrity. He was George Harrison, and he was one of a kind.
It may sound like a lofty thing to say on VH1, but basically, you know, what are we doing on this planet? I think through the Beatle experience that we'd grown so many years within a short period of time. I'd experienced so many things and met so many people, but I realized there was nothing actually that was giving me a buzz anymore. I wanted something better. I remember thinking, I'd love to meet somebody who will really impress me. I don't mean because somebody like, you know, Burt Lancaster, because he was in a movie.
Right.
I mean, I met Burt Lancaster and he impressed me on that level, but I meant somebody who could really impress me. And that's when I met Ravi, which was funny because he's this little fella with an obscure instrument from our point of view, and yet it led me into such depths. And I think that's the most important thing. It still is for me. You know, I get confused when I look around at the world and I see everybody's running around and, you know, as Bob Dylan said, he not busy being born is busy dying, and yet nobody's trying to figure out what's the cause of death and what happens when you die. I mean, that to me is the only thing really that's of any importance. The rest is all secondary.
Do you think pop musicians are afraid to deal with subjects that are so big, or it just doesn't occur to them, or do people think, oh, it's not commercial enough, who wants to talk about life itself?
I don't know what anybody else thinks, and you know, as the years have gone by, I seem to have found myself more and more out on a limb as far as, you know, that kind of thing goes. I mean, even close friends of mine, you know, they maybe don't want to talk about it because they don't understand it, but I believed in the thing that I read years ago, which I think was in the Bible. It said, knock and the door will be opened. And it's true. If you want to know anything in this life, you just have to knock on the door, whether that be physically on somebody else's door and ask them a question, or, which I was lucky to find, is the meditation. You know, it's all within. Because if you think about it, there isn't anything, I mean, in creation, the whole of creation, that is perfect. You know, there is nothing that goes wrong with nature, only what man does, then it goes wrong. But we are made of that thing the very essence of our being, of every atom in our body, is made from this perfect knowledge, this perfect consciousness, but superimposed on that is through, if I can use the word, the tidal wave of bull that goes through the world.
It's cable, you can say that.
Yeah, so there's this, we're being barraged by, you know, by bull. But not only that, the way the world is structured, or the way creation is structured, we have duality, which says yes, no, good, bad, loss, gain, birth, death. And it's this circle that you get trapped in. It's like the Memphis Blues again. And that's the hardest thing to, to understand. What is causing both of these things? What's causing day and night, good and bad? It's all the cause, and this is the effect. So, I mean, we're getting really transcendental here, but well, to say that our physical being is really on a very, very subtle level. It's just like the sap in a tree is the sap, and it runs throughout all the parts of the tree. Now, it's like that. Our bodies are manifesting into physical bodies, but the cause, the sap, is pure consciousness, pure awareness, and that is perfect and perfect knowledge. But we have to tap into that to understand it. And that's really why, for me, this record's important, because it's another little key to open up the within for each individual to be able to sit and turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream.
It's amazing, isn't it? I love how George worked his old philosophy back to the Ravi Shankar album. He was helping to promote Chants of India, which is a terrific record, by the way. George's love of Eastern music led to a lifelong devotion to Eastern philosophy and the sitar. It was George who turned the other Beatles onto the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and George stayed loyal to the Maharishi's teachings when the other guys all lost interest. I asked him to talk a little bit about what he valued in those and in his many other teachings. Ravi, you said a very beautiful thing a couple of years back in an interview. They asked you what it was like for you to become a big rock star, quote-unquote, a big pop star, as it were. And I recall you saying that it was easier for you because you were older at the time as opposed to someone like George who was in his early 20s when it happened. Do you think that that may be a reason why you found a search for something deeper in life? I think about you embracing Eastern philosophy. I think about Dylan becoming born again. Do you think it drove you to search for something deeper because you were worshipped by millions? And why do you think that it drove you to search for something deeper as opposed to someone like Elvis who had a hard time handling it?
Actually, Elvis, I think, looked for something deeper too.
Yeah,
because I know that he was, you know, at different times he was involved with different organizations, and I mean, it was sad about Elvis. I think compared to the Beatles, Elvis, I always saw the problem for him was that he was the only one who had that experience. Whereas, like, we were hippies, you know, so it takes more people to have that share the experience. I mean, the four of us all experienced the thing, and in a way we gained strength and supported each other in the turmoil. But yeah, I think fame is a good thing in terms of giving you heightened experience, or at least more experience, and but then it's what you do with that, or what that uncovers. I think for me, you know, as I say, I realize I want to, you know, I just want more. This isn't it. This isn't it, you know. Fame is not the goal. Money, you know, although money's nice to have, it can buy you a bit of freedom. You know, you can go to the Bahamas when you want, but it doesn't, it's not the answer. And the answer, you know, is how to get peace of mind and how to be happy. That's really what we're supposed to be here for. And the difficult thing is that we all go through our lives and through our days and we don't experience bliss. And, you know, it's a very subtle thing, and to experience that and to be able to know how to do that is something you don't just stumble across. You've got to search for it.
Did you experience bliss on stage or in the studio? In a way, did performing put you in touch with that bliss?
Well, we had happiness at times, and but, you know, not the kind of bliss I mean, where, like, every atom of your body is just buzzing, you know, because it's, again, it's beyond the mind. It's like, you know, it's when there's no thought involved. That, I mean, it's a pretty tricky thing to try to get to that stage, because it means controlling the mind and being able to transcend the relative states of consciousness, waking, sleeping, dreaming, which is all we really know. But there is another state that goes beyond all that, and it's in that state, that's where, you know, the bliss and the knowledge, you know, that's available is.
That was just a little taste of George Harrison's VH1 interview. We're going to be back with much more, including a never-before-seen performance in just a moment.
I got a question, sir. Do you hope to get a haircut at all?
No.
Nope, no, thanks.
I had one yesterday.
I've got no time for you right now. Don't bother me. Don't bother me. Don't bother me. Don't bother me. Something in the way she moves.
I'm John Fugelsang, and we're remembering George Harrison and looking at some of an interview he did with VH1 during a rare visit to our studio in 1997. Most everybody knows that George was the youngest Beatle, the lead guitar player, and the composer and singer of songs like Something, Here Comes the Sun, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And George always laughed about the fact that whenever Sinatra on stage would introduce his version of Something by calling it the greatest love song of the last 20 years, he would then credit it to Lennon and McCartney. It was George who led the Beatles to Indian music and culture, to meditation and to yoga. George was the most spiritual of the Fabs, and he was also, many experts say, the best actor in the Beatles. Steven Soderbergh, who directed Traffic and Erin Brockovich, is a huge fan of the Beatles' first movie, A Hard Day's Night, and he has said George was the best actor of the four of them by far. It's amazing there's not a line he doesn't nail.
Oh, by all means, I'd be quite prepared for that eventuality.
Anyway, if you don't cooperate, you won't meet Susan.
And who's this Susan when she's at home?
Only Susan Candy, our resident teenager. You'll have to love her. She's your symbol.
Oh, you mean that posh bird who gets everything wrong?
I beg your pardon.
Oh, yeah, the lads frequently sit round the television and watch her for a giggle. In fact, once we all sat down, wrote these letters saying how gear she was and all that rubbish.
She's a trendsetter. It's her profession.
She's a drag, a well-known drag.
George met his future wife, Pattie Boyd, on the set of A Hard Day's Night in 1964. That's her right there playing one of the girls the Beatles run into on the train in the beginning of the movie. George went on to have a second career as a film producer, making such great films as Mona Lisa, Monty Python's Life of Brian, and Time Bandits for Handmade Films. And he also had something of a third career as a concert promoter. He pretty much invented the all-star charity rock show with the concert for Bangladesh at Madison Square Garden in August of 1971, 30 years ago. I talked to George and Ravi Shankar about that historic event. When you think about all the talent you assembled and all the money you raised for the album, it was a very controversial thing in Bangladesh. John Lennon used to get in trouble all the time for his activism. Did anyone tell you, you know, look, it's a little bit hot, no, don't go there, were you discouraged at all by people for pursuing it?
No, not really. I think that was one of the things that I developed just by being in the Beatles, was being bold. And I think John had a lot to do with that, you know, because John Lennon, you know, if he felt something strongly, he just did it. And, you know, I picked up a lot of that by being a friend of John's, just that attitude of, well, just go for it, just do it. Like when Ravi said to me, you know, he wanted me and Peter Sellers to come and introduce the show and he could make $25,000. Straight away I thought of the John Lennon aspect of it, which was, you know, film it and make a record of it and, you know, let's make $1 million. And, you know, I think that boldness was, you know, by having that fame, by learning through the Beatles, you know, that you get a bit more clout, you know, if you're well known.
Well, let's talk about the concert, because it's just such a great, I mean, it's credited as being the first all-star benefit concert, the precursor to Live Aid, and all the benefit concerts of the 80s. How did you go about getting the talent who showed up? Eric Clapton, Ringo, Bob,
I just
Billy
got on.
Preston.
I just got on the telephone in Los Angeles. There was a fellow. There was an Indian astrologer who I'd met in L.A. and so I said to him, "Hey, is there any good particular day to put this concert on?" And he said August the 1st or August the 2nd. And I thought New York was the best place to put it, just because all the media and, you know, it's in between Europe and LA. And I checked Madison Square Garden. I found it was vacant on that day, on August. Was it the 1st or the 1st or the 2nd?
First.
And I just got on the telephone and I started calling people. And there was certain people I knew I could rely on, who was, you know, Ringo and Keltner were the drummers.
Mm-hmm.
And
Badfinger.
we got Badfinger just to, you know, be acoustic guitar players. I was hanging out a lot of the time with Leon Russell, and Leon said he'd come and bring Don Preston. And Leon actually was very helpful in the song itself, Bangladesh. I kind of wrote the song, but he suggested to me to write that intro, you know, where it kind of sets up the story.
My Friend Came to Me.
Yeah. And then Leon, of course, played on the single. We quickly made the single to try and get it out to, you know, get it on the radio.
How quick was it?
Sure, we did it in one night, I think.
Wrote it, recorded it?
I wrote it, you know, one day, and a couple of days later assembled the people who played on it. And then we all came off to, and I was calling Eric all the time. Eric was in a bad way at that time, had a slight drinking problem or something, and but he managed to make it eventually.
And how
but
about
that's why we ended up with Jesse Ed Davis, because he was around, and so we started showing him the songs we were going to do in case Eric never made it. And then Eric came, and we decided to have them both on because he couldn't chase Jesse away.
Those 3 guitarists in one show? It's terrific.
Yeah, and Don Preston as well, actually. He was Leon's guitar player, and then Bob.
Now, tell me, how did you get Bob? How did you get Bob out of seclusion up in New York State to come down and do the show?
I just asked him, really, and I don't know. My relationship with Bob is, I don't know. It's, you know, I've always just tried to be straight with him, because he's also been surrounded by tidal wave of bullshit. And so, you know, I just always tried to be straight with him, and you know, he responded. The night before the show, that was a bit tricky, because we went down to Madison Square where they were setting it up, and we stood on the stage, and suddenly it was a whole frightening scenario. And Bob turned to me and he said, "Hey man, I don't think I can make this. I've got a lot of work, you know, things to do in New Jersey," or something like that. And by that time I was so stressed out, because I'd just been on the telephone for like, I think it was 3 weeks, about 3 weeks of setting the entire thing up. I've been on the phone about 12 hours a day. And at that point I said, "Look, you know, don't tell me about that. You know, at least you've been on stage on your own. That's all you've ever done. You know, I've never, you know, I've always been in a band. I've never stood out front.
You've never done a tour before.
So, you know, I don't want to know about that." And right up till he came on the stage, I didn't know if he was going to come.
When the show began, you didn't know if he
Yeah, and I had on a list on my guitar, and I had a bit where it said Bob ? And if you look in the film, I turn around to see if he's around, and he's so nervous that he's just coming on, even before I announced him.
He hadn't been on stage in a long time.
He delivered, and that really, I think, you know, it really made the show, you know, by having, you know, Ravi and myself was one thing, but Bob just gave it that extra bit of clout.
We'll have more from George Harrison's interview with VH1, plus an unexpected performance when we come back.
Mr. Harrison, with all of the enormous problems in the world, how did you happen to choose this one to do something about?
Because I was asked by a friend if I'd help, you know, that's all.
I'm John Fugelsang, and we're remembering George Harrison and looking at some of the interview he did with VH1 during a visit to our studio in 1997. In just a bit, we're going to show you some of the incredible songs that George played for us that day and what turned out to be his last public performance. For all the images that he's left us, it's George's music we're going to remember best. His solo record, All Things Must Pass, came out right after the Beatles' breakup in 1970 and was a huge bestseller. It was re-released in early 2001, remastered with some extra tracks. And among George's many solo hits were My Sweet Lord, What Is Life, and Cracker Box Palace. George stopped recording shortly after John Lennon was killed in 1980, but he returned in 1987 with the platinum album Cloud 9 and the #1 single, Got My Mind Set on You. Around the same time, George teamed up with Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison as the Traveling Wilburys and had another #1 hit record. After that, he kept on writing and recording music in the privacy of his home studio. In talking with George about his recent work, it was clear that he had a lot of other things on his mind besides just music.
I know the one benefit concert that you've done in England in the past couple of 20 years or so was for the Natural Law Party back in '92, I believe. What brought that about?
Well, it was one of the things that made it easier was I'd just done a tour of Japan with Eric Clapton's band. So I was kind of up to speed with the songs that I was doing, and I had the band was there that knew all the material. But that was, I think there was a general election going on, and as far as I'm concerned, whichever, you know, the Neil Innes, you know, from
The Ruddles.
He wrote a song once and he said, no matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. And it's like that, you know, in England you always get, as far as I was concerned, the left, the centre and the right, they're all really the same. They're all different shades of the same greyness. And although it was a long shot, you know, Maharishi tried to get these people formed together into a party which would be called the Natural Law Party, which was...
the same Maharishi
Mahesh. And the idea behind it really is to have consciousness as the basic thing, because if really, you know, we get in government or we get in any situation in life, we get the reflection of our own consciousness. We can't really complain about what we have because that is us. It's a reflection of our own being. Now, if we could have people who are actually conscious in a spiritual sense, then all the underlying problems to society, I mean, it wouldn't be able to change just overnight, but over a generation or 2 generations, you could have things where, for instance, say in England, and I'm sure it's the same here, you get disease. So you've got a lot of expenditure on hospitals and on fixing up people who have disease. Now the problem is that most doctors, they study disease. They don't know about health. So you'd need to reprogram stuff so that you teach people about how to be healthy. That way you don't spend so much money on disease. You'd have, people would be healthier. You wouldn't have such a, you know, a requirement for, you know, all the various things that take up all the money. You'd be able to use that money for something else. So the natural law that operates on this planet or in the universe, everything, as I said earlier, everything works in a perfect order. And there's a scheme to things which has a certain intelligence that drives it and makes everything work. Now, if we as individuals could go to that level of consciousness where we can bring it into our being, and as Maharishi Mahesh once said, for a forest to be green, each tree must be green. So it's no use just 1 or 2 people being, you know, like this. You'd have to make the whole of society, if they had that understanding. And that's what I think really you'd have to, you know, school people. Right from being children, teach people about their health, about their bodies, about consciousness, because it's all to do with consciousness. Raise the level of consciousness, and then everything automatically becomes better.
Do you think it can happen, or do you think people are totally on autopilot too much?
It can happen, but it's something which will take a long, long time, generations of people. I mean, if you look now, just through, say, from the 60s or the 50s, there's a lot more people, thanks to, say, Indian music, thanks to rock and roll music, who have got much more understanding. You go out there on the street now, you can find Indian spice shops, Indian restaurants, and places to go for yoga, for meditation. There's a much higher awareness, generally, on those kind of things. And so it is seeping through. I mean, where did all the really good hippies go when they all dropped out?
They're driving Volvos, George.
Well, I don't think all of them are. I think a lot of them are, have, brought up, there's probably 2 generations of kids now who are much more open to that type of consciousness, and they've been brought up by, being vegetarian or whatever, that helps the society become, a much more balanced. It's all to do with the balance. We've got too much extreme going on.
You're optimistic.
You have to be optimistic, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I just it's so funny because when you talk to people, it's down the middle. Those who think it's getting better, those who think it's getting worse, and those who think it's reflected in the music in all cases.
But it is getting better and worse, because that's the nature of relativity. Good and bad, good and bad. But the individual, if the individual gets that consciousness, then it doesn't matter, because in a way you can retain the balance between the good and the bad. Because really, good and bad are the same. They are. Yeah. It's the same sort of thing. So it's like in the middle is the safe path.
We're going to have more from VH1's interview with George Harrison, plus a one-of-a-kind performance when we come back.
Each day just goes so fast. I turn around, it's past. You don't get time to hang a sign on me.
I'm John Fugelsang, and we are remembering George Harrison. When George stopped by our studio with Ravi Shankar in 1997, nobody expected him to ever perform. He hadn't really toured the States since '76. But when he and Ravi's wife Sukanya got to our studio, they were followed in by this young woman carrying a guitar case. So everybody here was nudging everybody and saying, look, George brought somebody with a guitar. Now, as you'll see, once we were talking for like an hour or so, I very rudely and brazenly asked him if he would consider playing a song or two for us. George looked a little bit startled, but he was a very good sport, and he asked, what do we want to hear? So everybody was shouting out requests. My bosses at VH1 were in my earpiece saying, get him to play a Beatles song, get him to play a Beatles song. Well, it was even better than that. George played an Indian tune, Prabhuji, with Ravi and his wife, and then he thrilled us all with a brand new song that he had never played in public before. Here it is now, and it's a great one. This is If You Don't Know Where You're Going, Any Road Will Take You There. Do we want to clear the microphones away so we can speak, or do you want to hang on to the instruments and play some more? Would you like to play a little bit more?
Fine.
Can we induce you to play a little bit more? Perhaps
sing or play?
Either, or maybe if you'd like to play one of George's songs and and back up on sitar, we wouldn't get angry if that happened.
No, there's nothing, but I don't know.
No, we don't really have a repertoire.
Solo.
Oh well.
Do some solo.
Ravi said to do something solo, George.
Oh, I don't know.
Ravi said to do something, George.
And then I'll play a solo.
Yeah, Ravi said.
Okay?
What do you think? If you don't like it, we can burn it.
Yeah.
What do I know? Do I know anything?
You want to do a Dylan song? You want to do one of yours?
Sing that song if you don't know where you're going.
It may not be suitable on this floor.
Well, I could do with a bit of a practice, really.
Give it a whirl. We'll roll in the rehearsal. How about that? We'll tape the rehearsal.
I'm just rehearsing. You don't have a capo, do you, Mrs. Guitar Lady?
Thank you, Mrs. Guitar Lady. It's such a coincidence that's your actual last name, too. I can't believe it.
I have to figure this out, let's see. Try it. Must be the only person who doesn't know his own songs. Well, we'll try a verse of this one. I've been traveling on a boat and a plane and a car and a bike and a bus and a train, traveling there, traveling here, everywhere, in every gear. But oh Lord, you pay the price with the spin of the wheel, with the roll of the dice. Ah yeah, you pay your fare, and if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I've been traveling on the wing and a prayer, on the skin of my teeth, the breadth of her hair, traveling where the four winds blow, with the sun on my face in the ice and the snow. But ooh-wee, it's a game. Sometimes you're cool, sometimes you're lame. Oh yeah, it's somewhere, and if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. You may not know where you came from, you may not know who you are, may not even have wondered how you got so far. But I keep traveling around the bend. There was no beginning, there is no end. It wasn't born, it never dies. There are no edges, there is no sides. But oh, we just don't win. It's so far out, the way out is in. Bow to God and call him sir. But if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
What an amazing thrill it was to hear George play a new song in public for the very first time. And he actually topped that right away with another unusual choice. And he invited people to sing along on this one. Only I Did. But this is a Traveling Wilburys song from Volume 3 that had never been sung publicly before and had never been sung by George. Dylan sang this on the album. This is If You Belong to Me. So what do you think?
I don't know. I could go home and practice a bit and then come and
you know
do
what?
it
You can practice here and we'll roll on it. And if you don't like it, no one will see it. If you want to, do you want to try winging another one, or?
Hey. There's a bit of busking going on here too. What's that one?
One of yours?
Well, sort of. Half.
What's that?
You
not for you?
You won't sing round the room tonight in someone else's clothes. You're always coming out of things smelling like a rose. Hung your head and your heart is filled with so much misery. But you'd be happy as you could be if you belonged to me. Well, you say let's go to the rodeo and see some cowboy fall. Sometimes it seems to me you have no sympathy at all. You hang your head and your heart is filled with so much misery. But you'd be happy as you could be if you
belong to me. And it ain't easy to get to you, but there must be some kind of a way, if only to connect with you for one moment of each day. You say that you're all washed up, got nothing else to give. Seems like we never figured out how long you got to live. But you could feel like a baby again, sitting on your daddy's knee. And you'd be happy as you could be if you belonged to me.
One more amazing performance by George Harrison when we come back.
Here comes the sun, here comes the sun.
It doesn't take long to be from 17 to being 57. 40 years just goes like that.
Here comes the sun, here comes the sun. It's alright, it's alright.
I'm John Fugelsang, remembering George Harrison. Now, one last note about that incredible spur-of-the-moment concert George put on for a few lucky VH1 staffers and friends back in '97. We were all, obviously knocked out by the performance, and so when the taping was done, I thanked George for bringing his guitar along, and that was when we found out that George hadn't actually brought a guitar. The young woman who walked in behind him with the guitar case, who we all assumed was with George, wound up just being a friend of one of the crew members. George didn't know her at all, but he still played for us. Anyway, it was a beautiful accident. We're very lucky that guitar girl walked in, and lucky I didn't know better than to ask George to play. He was just too nice to tell a nervous VJ no. George Harrison was a great musician, a great songwriter, and somebody whose name is going to live on forever. But he was also a warm, kind, and beautiful man who wanted no part of hero worship. I was somebody who had always intensely worshipped him as a hero since my teenage years, and George taught me a very valuable lesson that day about that. And so that's how I'm always going to remember George Harrison. And here now is something for you to remember as well. Thank you for watching. Want to try one of the Beatles tunes? You want to try something? A Bob song, a Carl Perkins song? I'll take a Rick Astley song, George. I'll take a Spice Girls medley, George.
Yeah, I do wouldn't mind if I could think of one. Really?
Sunrise doesn't last all morning, and a cloudburst doesn't last all day. Seems my love is up and has left you with no warning, but it's not always gonna be this way. All things must pass, all things must pass away. And a sunset doesn't last all evening, and a mind can blow those clouds away. And after all this, my love is up and must be leaving, but it's not always gonna be this way. All things must pass, all things must pass away. All
Together now. All things must pass, and none of life's strings can last. So I must be on my way. Oh, I'm facing another day, and a darkness only stays at night time, and in the morning it will fade away. The daylight is good at arriving at the right time, and it's not always gonna be this way. All things must pass, all things must pass away. All things must pass, all things must pass away.